All right, well, welcome to class. We've got an interesting day set up for today. On the overhead, what you can see is we've got today's topic, purpose, and the point of today. You guys had a reading for today, chapters 15 through like 30, something like that. Chapter 2, pages 15 through 30 for today. And that chapter dealt a lot with how writers use language and rhetoric to persuade an audience. It was largely about persuasion and modes of persuasion. So today's topic is going to be how writers persuade readers. How do we effectively persuade readers as writers? The purpose for today is to discuss the rhetorical strategies writers use in relating to audiences, connecting with audiences, and persuading audiences. And I have emphasized the word audiences there for a purpose. I think connecting with your audience is absolutely critical in persuading an audience ultimately, and knowing who that audience is really critical. So the point of today's discussion is going to be, I came up with this afternoon. I said, successful communication often results from convincing an audience that you understand their needs. If you know what the person sitting across from you ultimately needs, and then are able to convey to that person, hey, I know what you need, in a way that shows your expertise in a particular subject matter or what have you, that is what's going to lead to success in communication. It's identifying, what is my audience's need? What do they need? Your audience for a lot of your writing in this course is going to be me. So what is it that I need to see from you guys? Anybody got an idea? Suggestions? Concerns?
What we've learned in the class, or how to write?
Yes. That's what I want to see. And that's ultimately what I need to see, is that you're learning the course objectives for this course and are growing, hopefully personally. So those are the kinds of things that I'm looking to see in your writing, project 1, 2, 3, and 4 for this course, is that we're meeting the course objectives. So, again, successful communication often results from convincing an audience you understand their needs, have suitable expertise, and are focused and purposefully driven towards meeting those needs. Does that make sense? So if you can identify what your audience's need is, whether you're in real estate trying to find a home for somebody who wants to buy a home, or whether you're a mortgage lender and you're trying to find the best home loan for somebody buying a home, or whether you're talking about what's the best party to go to on a Friday night with friends. Identifying what people's needs are is absolutely critical towards successfully communicating with an audience, whether it's a roommate or whether it's a boardroom that you're trying to convince about some environmental plan. So, go ahead.
What if you're writing just for anyone to read? You don't have a specific audience in mind. Do you still get effective communication?
Can you give a specific example?
Let's say, for instance, you wrote a blog. You just put it on a blog for anyone to go into it whenever
Sure.
they wanted to. Not necessarily meant for anyone.
Well, that's a great point, Yasmin. So if you're writing a blog, who is your audience with a blog? Who could it be?
Literally anyone that visits it.
Mm-hmm.
From elderly to young age to someone across the world in China who understands English.
Sure.
Anyone.
The potential audience is huge. But a lot of blogs, addressing specifically what you're talking about, a lot of blogs are sort of personal blogs, where you might be writing about what ticked you off on a given day, or what you did at work, or what have you, and there's not a clear audience in mind. And this is an interesting example. My wife and I, we read I'll say a colleague's blog, and a lot of times my wife will read it and she'll get ticked off. She'll read this blog and say, is she even aware of who her audience is about her blog? And I think I've come to realize, like the point that you just made, is the person who's writing the blog isn't thinking about an audience at all. She's just writing what her feelings are on a given day. But by not thinking about who her audience is, an audience that actually reads it and disagrees with something or finds something somewhat offensive, they can become, upset by what's being written, which I think is a huge topic. Blogs ultimately, so what is the purpose of a blog? With this blog that we have for the class here, I think the way that I see it is the purpose is primarily to put the videos from class online. It's not really to facilitate a discussion. Although if you guys want to comment on it, you're more than welcome to do that. I keep a blog as well, sort of a personal, professional blog called How to Publish a Book. And it has a very specific focus and purpose in mind. Always think about what your purpose is. If you've got a clearly defined purpose, like how to publish a book, then an audience that comes there sees and identifies what that purpose is. Oh, this is a discussion, the stuff on this blog is about how to publish a book. Maybe you're talking about politics in your blog. Maybe you're talking about sports. The more clear your purpose is, the better you are as a writer, or the better off you are as a writer at connecting with your audience. So I don't know, I'm kind of on the fence on the blogs that are just personal blogs. I think that it serves a purpose, but I don't know why you would put that out into the public domain without thinking about your audience. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Have you ever read a blog where you said, this person is just not thinking about what I'm, doing or what have you? Have you ever gotten ticked off at a blog? Can you give an example?
MySpace, a couple friends of mine, they put some stuff on blogs, and one of my friends, she just put some random stuff on a blog that doesn't need to be up there. I guess it was just her releasing some feelings or whatnot, but it was like, why are you showing it to an audience basically that probably doesn't want to read it?
Sure. And this is a critical thing. I mean, you guys have grown up in this internet age, really, so a lot of this you've learned implicitly just by the culture that you're a part of. And you know this etiquette, and you know if somebody's, being offensive or whatever online. But again, I guess if you think about rhetorical strategies, if you as a writer are thinking about who your audience is as you're writing your blog, or as you're designing your Facebook page or what have you, if you're thinking about, well, how is this going to be received, you're much more likely to have an effective point of communication with that audience than if you just don't, give a crap. If you just say, oh, I don't care what people think about what I say, I'm just going to get on there and write whatever I feel. That's going to potentially irritate people. Whether it's a blog or whether you're going in for a job interview, you really want to think about who your audience is and finding a way to connect with them and relate to them.
Well, what if what you're writing is fundamentally for entertainment?
Well, then you have a different purpose. So again, all these components: purpose, audience, author, and topic. If you have these four things working together, let's say you've got an entertainment blog and you're a comedian, a stand-up comedian, and your blog is to talk about the shows that you've done, to kind of write funny stuff about what's been going on in politics. Well, then you've got a clear purpose in mind. But I guarantee you, when you find people who have trouble with their communication, it's tied up to one of these four things. They're either not thinking about their audience, or they have an unclear purpose, or they don't know who they are as an individual writing the blog. But the more clear your purpose is, and the more clear your audience is in your mind, the more effective your writing is going to be. So again, and that's kind of the gist of today's point, is know your audience. Identify your audience. Think about their values and their assumptions. You're going to hear a phrase later on this semester called cultural assumptions. This will come up in the next week or two. What are the shared cultural assumptions that we have as Americans? We share certain cultural assumptions, certain values that other cultures might not assume as valuable. And if you're writing for a global audience, you've got to be aware of what that potential audience's values are. If you're writing for just a U.S. audience, then you need to be aware of what that audience is. But before you put something out into the public domain, particularly in writing, think about who could potentially read this and what's my purpose with it. And I think if you think of those two things, what your purpose is and who your audience likely is, and you keep that in mind, your writing can be very effective. I've got a few keywords that I've listed up here for today as well, things that came up during the reading, sort of brainstorming words from the reading for today: audience, audience needs, the author's competency and or expertise, drawing on other experts, credibility, citation, documentation, direct quotes, paraphrases, all of this stuff, citing sources. This is huge. This is how you develop credibility. So we'll talk about this a little bit more as we move along here. What I want to do first for today is a writing assignment. This will be portfolio assignment number 1. So go ahead and open up Word, open up a blank Word document. And the portfolio assignment number 1. So what we're going to do with the portfolio is from time to time we'll have sort of reflective essays. That's really the purpose of the portfolio. And when you're done writing a reflective essay, whether it's on an assignment or whether it's what we're doing in class or what have you, we'll print it up, you'll put it in a 3-ring binder, and then at the end of the semester, your portfolio is 5% of your grade. So come on in. So be sure to keep all of these as you go along the semester. You can print up what you're writing today, and I have a 3-hole punch thing so that you can put it in a portfolio or a 3-ring binder if you have it. So what's the assignment here? We've got portfolio assignment number 1. Let's first start by reviewing the English 101 learning objectives from the syllabus together. So I want to take out the syllabus if you've got a copy of that. And let's look at the learning objectives. In other words, what's the purpose? What's the goal for this particular course? Those are the learning objectives. They begin on the bottom of page 1 of the syllabus and continue on to the top of page 2. So we're going to look at the learning objectives. What you should have in mind, though, is, as we're doing this is, think about 1 or 2 of these learning objectives that we've begun to meet already, either in the readings that you've done or an in-class assignment that you've done. So choose 1 to 2 of these learning objectives that you feel we've begun to address in the readings and classwork we've done so far. And then I've got a 2-part question here that I'd like you to answer in writing for portfolio number 1. But let's take a look first at the learning objectives for this course, because we kind of breezed through those on day number 1. Who would like to read learning objective number 1? Go ahead.
Learn basic principles of rhetoric and develop an understanding of writing text as arguments generated for particular purposes, audience, and rhetorical context.
Excellent. So we're learning, the principles of rhetoric. You can already begin to see how we've done that. We've been talking about the rhetorical context. Who can tell me what the rhetorical context is? What are the 4 points of the rhetorical context? Go ahead.
Audience, topic, author,
Purpose. Exactly. Excellent. So it's author, audience, topic, and purpose. Excellent, Matt. It's Matt, right? So those are the 4 components of the rhetorical context. Other things that we've been talking about, these 9 questions that Ward and Vanderlei ask in the opening 2 chapters of Real Text, are all dealing with and talking about and discussing rhetorical elements that we have in writing. So you need to know those 9 questions that they're asking in Real Text. Question? Okay. Point number 2. This is learning objective number 2. These are the goals for this course. So the second goal is to examine similarities and differences in forms of inquiry and writing across academic disciplines. I've mentioned this a couple of times, but again, one of the goals for this course is to examine writing in different disciplines. So Unit 1, we're talking primarily about rhetoric, which is housed within the domain of the humanities. The second part of Unit 1, we're going to be looking at speech communication in more detail, which is housed within the communication department, sometimes within the humanities, sometimes jointly. But when we get to Unit 2 in this course, we're going to be looking at the social sciences and how writing is published and done in the social sciences. In Unit 3, we're going to be looking at the biological sciences as well as the social sciences. So how's writing done in biology? How's it done in psychology? And then in Unit 4 of this course, we're going to be looking at how writing is done in business and marketing. So for different academic disciplines, you have different modes of writing, different ways of writing. And that's one of the goals for this course, is to examine the similarities and differences in the forms of inquiry and writing in these different academic disciplines. Somebody want to read point number 3? Colin, how you doing today?
All right.
Can you read point 3 for us?
Sure will.
Thank you.
Practice analytical reading strategies and hone the ability to summarize, paraphrase, draw evidence from, synthesize, and respond to the scholarship of others.
Right. Excellent. So practice analytical reading strategies. You guys have already begun to do this, and Ward and Vanderlei really point out different strategies that you can use in your reading. Questions to ask, purpose-driven reading. That's one of the things that they talk about in Chapter 1 is reading for the author's purpose. What is the purpose of a given chapter, paragraph, book as a whole, poem, short story, newspaper article? What is the purpose? So reading and practicing analytical skills is huge. It's a big part of this course as well. And we've done some of these already. Point number 4, learn to find and evaluate print and electronic source materials appropriate for academic research projects. Somebody want to read point number 5? Go ahead.
Learn to develop original arguments for a range of academic purposes.
Excellent. Learn to develop original arguments for a range of academic purposes. So in these different disciplines, like in the humanities, the social sciences, and the natural sciences, the way you construct an argument, the methodologies that you use is different. Obviously, if you're doing a lab report on cellular growth, the way you would go about writing that and the way you go about presenting an argument is different than if you were writing, let's say, in the social sciences, doing a case study of somebody who has depression. The tone that you would use would be very different. The way you would go about writing it is constructed quite different, and the methodology that you use is very different. Is everybody still with me? All right. Number 6. I guess we're up to number 6, right? So practice critically evaluating their own and others' work and collaborating effectively with other writers throughout the writing process. So we do a lot of, group work in here. Some people enjoy that. How many folks like doing group work? Just about everybody. So we'll do a lot of group work in here. And then finally, point number 7. Somebody want to read that? Go ahead.
Practice and refine technical skills in areas such as grammar, mechanics, and the documentation of source materials. The
fun stuff, grammar, documentation. The big 2 documentation styles that we've talked about in here so far, I've mentioned the MLA format and the APA format. You'll be using the MLA format for project number 1. MLA stands for Modern Language Association. APA stands for something psychological association. I'm big on documentation as a creative writer. I'm being ironic. Okay. But it is important and it's a part of this course, so we will address documentation styles as well. So you've got these learning objectives in front of you. And what I want to do is this portfolio assignment, I guess I can bring that more centered here. Portfolio assignment number 1. So choose 1 to 2 of these learning objectives. You can just choose one if that's easiest to do. Obviously it would be. So choose one of these learning objectives that you feel we've begun to address in the readings and classwork we've done so far. And then if you would, answer this question sort of in essay format. This is going to be printed up and then it's going to go into your portfolio as portfolio assignment number 1. How has the reading, discussion, or in-class assignment we've done met the objective, and how has that shaped your learning in this course? Ultimately, what have you learned so far? We've had class now. This is our 3rd class day. What have you learned in here? This is a bit of a reflection to put into your portfolio. So let's spend about 10 minutes on that, maybe a little bit less, answering that question in relation to one of these learning objectives. So the first thing you need to do is select one of these objectives that we've begun to meet, and then try to answer these questions. Matt? No, it doesn't necessarily have to be 5. I think what you want to go for here, word count wise, is probably about a half a page to a full page of text, single spaced. So if you double space, it'd be a full page to a little over a full page. Double space would be great. Great question. So it's right at 6. Let's work on this until about 10 minutes past 6. In class, question is, how has the reading, discussion, or in-class assignment we've done met the objective? You chose one of these objectives, and how has that shaped your learning in this course? What have you learned so far? I'd love to hear from some folks I haven't heard from yet. Stephanie, why don't you start us off here?
I just talked about ways that being a rhetorical reader,
Mm-hmm.
talk about that, and how it's not just you can use it in other aspects like your studying habits and things like that. Because
Mm-hmm.
I've actually taken what I learned and used it for my other classes where I break up my reading. And
That's great.
And I try to research things that are new to me so I can get a better grasp of it, and later on I can reflect on it and everything. So just learning to be a better rhetorical reader as well as a writer.
That's outstanding. Excellent. Somebody else? Cersei, how about you?
Pretty much just spoke about how being a rhetorical reader links also with being a rhetorical writer, that within each field that you have to kind of think as the other.
Great.
How they link and understand.
That's awesome. Someone else? Go ahead. What's your name again? Sorry.
James.
James. Okay.
I just talked about the skills, like the 9 questions, that if you learn them, it'll be a habit for you.
Mm-hmm.
Read and write. You won't have to think about it.
Sure.
They'll not be writing.
Yeah, I think that those 9 points that they raised really do help to give us focus, as we're reading and writing. And it's neat how sort of consolidated they are. They really kind of cover a lot of bases in a very short span. Claire, how about you?
I basically talked about the 9 questions as well, how they help me realize I can analyze things and not leave anything out.
That's great.
A better writer and reader if you use the 2 to help.
Excellent. Outstanding. Somebody else? Go ahead.
I talked about how the in-class assignment and how that was helpful because it really made you think about who your audience was, which is something that I wouldn't usually do, I don't think, and how it really made you conscientious of what you were doing. And
Sure.
then I also talked about how I like the follow-up assignment where we got to work together in groups and have your classmates read what you had written and point out some other things that you maybe needed to work on, and I thought that was really helpful, and that that activity
Great.
accomplished 2 objectives.
That's great. Has anybody in here ever had like a writing group where you met with somebody outside of class to kind of share writing or what have you? Sunny, was it a good experience?
It was good for what it was supposed to work for.
Great. It's one of the things that's that as you develop as a student, I think it's a good strategy. Obviously, you probably have study partners. Somebody you might go to the library with or something like that, or go down to the dorm lobby and read with or what have you. But having like a fixed writing group is not a bad idea. It's a good strategy to have somebody who can read your work outside of class before you turn a paper in. You know, they can give you feedback, and you do the same for them. I've got a writing group that I meet with about every 2 to 3 weeks. 2 of the folks that are in the group are actually colleagues of mine here at State, and we meet, you know, we go out to eat somewhere and we knock around somebody's manuscript. A lot of times it's sort of fiction writing, but we could bring academic writing if we wanted to do something like that as well. And it just, as you guys saw, you know, in class, it helps to have somebody else's perspective on something before you turn it in. So, Sonny, how about you? What was the learning objective that you selected?
I went with the discussions that we had in class, and then like, I guess I'm more of like a sensory person anyway. So hearing what other people think about certain parts of the objectives kind of push it in.
That's great.
Understand it better.
So some of the discussions that we've had have helped sort of process the objectives, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
That's great. Jacob, how about you? What was the learning objective that you picked?
The first was, in high school, my writing was more of, okay, this is what I'm saying, I don't care if you understand it or not.
Mm-hmm.
And just through the reading, especially chapter 2, it talks about you want to make sure that your reader is
Mm-hmm.
at least has a base knowledge of what you're talking about. So if you do introduce higher concepts,
Sure.
it's not that far of a jump for it.
That's great. Yeah, and so much of this it really is, Jacob, about audience and knowing what will connect with that audience, what might go over their head, and then, you know, what might be too slow and would bore them, and then trying to find that median in between. And that's, you know, a big part of writing. Tyler, how about you? What was the learning objective?
I picked the first one, dealing with understanding rhetoric and understanding text using different purposes.
Sure.
I talked a little bit about what he did, paying attention to the audience and what their needs were, but I also talked about, I think some other people have said, how people can write so differently in different fields.
True.
A business person would write completely different from like a creative writer.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Yeah, and a lot of the, you know, the execution of how you actually would write a business document or a science document is different. Some of the rhetorical strategies are universal, and I think that's kind of what's neat, is that Ward and Vanderlei talk about how these things kind of, you know, you use different types of strategies in different disciplines. But it's absolutely true, you're absolutely right, Tyler, that, you know, we do write in different ways in different academic disciplines. Something to be aware of as you're moving forward here at NC State. You know, the big thing, I guess, is to think about, well, what is my academic discipline? Think about that for a minute. Everybody kind of has an idea of what you want to major in, if not a very firm idea of what you want to major in. One thing to begin pursuing is, you know, well, what are the professionals in that field doing in terms of publishing work? How do I find that? What is the language that they use? What are the forms that they use? Because if you think about it, as you progress as a student in that given major, whatever your major is, part of your success is going to be in communicating to the professors in that discipline that you get it, that you get what that language is, whether it's business or whether it's nursing or whether it's, you know, pre-med, pre-law, whether it's engineering or what have you. If you can communicate to the professors in that discipline, in that field, that you understand the kinds of things that they write and publish and are interested in, the more likely you are to succeed in connecting with them as a potential audience for your work, academically speaking. So, audience is really critical. Let's keep things rolling here. So we have these keywords that I had written up at the top of the lesson plan for today. Again, reviewing today's topic. The topic is how writers persuade readers. So we've been talking about that. We've been talking about connecting with audience, talking about how some of these learning objectives help facilitate that, you know, persuasion, ultimately. Then today's purpose was to discuss the rhetorical strategies writers use in relating to audiences. connecting with audiences and ultimately persuading audiences. Why is one candidate more persuasive than the other? Why does one person get elected more so than the other? You know, a lot of these strategies that Ward and Vanderlei talk about in this book are part of their repertoire, if you will. It's part of their tools as a speaker and as a communicator, as a politician. Is showing that they're a credible source, that they understand the needs of their audience. I'm convinced that's a huge element. The more that one candidate can convey sincerely and believably that they understand the needs of the people in their audience, the more likely they are to convince that audience that they're the right candidate for them. So audience is really huge. And again, today's point is that successful communication often results from convincing an audience you not only understand their needs, but have suitable expertise and are focused and purposefully driven towards meeting those needs. Then under these points, we've got keywords. What I'd like to do next is think about these keywords in relation to the reading for today. So if you would go ahead and take out your textbook. And open to chapter 2. And some of this we've covered already, but what I'd like to do is look at these keywords in light of the reading. So what is it that Ward and Vanderlei say, for example, about audience? We've covered a lot of that already. The audience's needs. What do Ward and Vanderlei say about audience needs? Anybody? I'll just sort of brainstorm what we're talking about here on the board. Well, don't everybody speak at once. What do Ward and Vanderlei say about audience needs?
You need to understand what the author may be reading your writing for.
Yes.
Like if they're writing, they may be just skimming your writing to look for something in particular, or they might be trying to read it from cover to cover to gain a full understanding of what you're talking about or learn something new.
So writer needs to know why. And for what a reader reads. Excellent. That's a great point. Somebody else on audience needs. What is it that Ward and Vanderlei say?
You have to know how they're gonna interact with it, I guess. Like how they're gonna interpret certain things, or like if they're gonna have a conversation kind of with the text, or how they're gonna read into it.
That's great. So how do they interact with the text? That's a great point. So let's look at this next keyword that I have here. The author's competency and expertise. And I'll sum this up with just one word for the sake of putting it on the board here. But the author's expertise. What do they say about the author's expertise?
The writer should be able to answer any question the reader has while reading it. Like if the reader asks the question, the author should be able to anticipate that question and answer it.
So the author is capable, basically, of answering any question a reader might have. What happens if the author simply isn't capable of answering a particular question? What suggestion do they provide there? Brooke?
You're supposed to show them where they can get further information.
Right. Point them to other experts in a given field. So if the author, ultimately what you'd ideally like to have is convince the audience that you're completely capable, but I think we as humans understand that we're not going to know everything on a given subject. So what you would want to do is if you are stumped in a particular area, is to then be able to point the audience in a way that's satisfactory to that audience, to a particular expert. So one way of sort of summarizing or paraphrasing this is know the field. Know the field you're in. Know the academic field you're in. Who are the experts? One thing, I mentioned the How to Publish a Book website. I've had a bunch of people, I guess whenever I first put it out, I had to do a lot of this stuff rhetorically. I had to think about it. My main motivation for starting it was I realized that there are tons of writers who have a novel in them or a short story or what have you, and they want to publish a book, but they don't know how to go about publishing a book, and publishing as a business is extremely mysterious. So that was why I started the site. But I've had a few people who have questioned my ethos and credibility in doing the site over the years. A few people, not a lot, but a couple people have said, you know, well, you haven't published widely, so how do you have the ethos to be able to do this? It's a knock at my credibility. These things happen. So what do I use as a defense if somebody asks me that? Well, I point to the website and say, well, what I do on the website is I interview experts, folks who have published 30, 40, or 50 novels, and I ask them about how they went about publishing, which is point number 2. You know, it's knowing who the experts in a given field are and drawing on their expertise to help bolster your own. So it's good to know what you're talking about to begin with, but sometimes you have to, I mean, we as humans know that you're not going to know everything, and that other people have a perspective and a base of knowledge that is, you know, equally as important. So being able to draw on other folks' knowledge is huge. Which is keyword number or key phrase number 3, or the next one here. Drawing on other experts and credibility. So what do they say about credibility specifically?
Just go about, you know, the way you can go about establishing that credibility, like through, you know, consulting an expert or, you know, personal experience or,
Exactly.
you know, knowing your sources.
Let's look at the bottom of page 17 specifically. The section under writing to establish a relationship with audience. When you write, you present yourself to the reader, and you do so in the hopes of having a positive effect on your audience. So anytime you're writing or speaking to a specific audience, and it could be as informal as chatting with folks as you leave the class here today, or it could be as formal as, you know, doing the presidential nomination acceptance speech for your particular party. It didn't get much more formal than that. But, you know, whether it's informal or formal, the point is if you want to have a positive effect on your audience, you've got to present yourself as a credible source to that audience. They say, of course, you stand a better chance of influencing your audience if you create a good relationship with them. To earn your audience's trust, consider the following strategies. And again, the wonderful practical, pragmatic approach of Ward and Vanderlei is evident here. They give us very concrete things that we can use. Develop your own expertise. You know, so become an expert on something. Everybody in here is an expert on something. I guarantee you know more about some particular subject area than everybody else in this room. So what is that area? And learn to develop it. Then also rely on the expertise of others, which is what I was talking about with my website. At critical spots in your writing, places where it is crucial that the reader believe you, depend on the information, ideas, or recommendations of researchers who are recognized as experts in the field. And you see this in a lot of academic writing where they cite a lot of different sources. This is why we cite. It strengthens. It's like the foundation of your own work. If you use other sources and you cite it correctly, it shows, A, that you know the field, that you have respect for the field, that you're knowledgeable, and that you're drawing on the research of other folks and building your own research. Point number 3 that they have here is consider whether your own experience is somehow relevant to your subject. So what is it in your past that is relevant to the topic that you're writing about? If it is, how might it enhance your credibility with your audience? Make good use of specialized knowledge you have. And then finally, explore the assumptions you share with the experts writing about this topic, which is huge. You got to know what other folks are writing on in your given field. What assumptions do you share with the reader? Again, thinking about what the reader knows and what values the readers have. What do they value? If your assumptions do not match those of the experts and your reader, you can choose either to de-emphasize the difference or to emphasize the difference and attempt to persuade the reader to think differently, which is a challenge. But that's what they recommend doing. If you have a position, in other words, that is totally different than everybody else in your field, and you know it's right, what you've got to do is build the evidence to support that, and then find a way to de-emphasize the differences and point out the strengths and the positive effect of your particular research. That's what they're encouraging us to do. So the next key word on the overhead up here, beyond citation, is documentation. We've talked a little bit about the documentation for Project 1 is going to be MLA. Probably spend a little bit more time on this in the next week or two. Just be aware that we will be using documentation style MLA for right now. Things you need to cite. So you've got the speech coming up, Project 1. You're going to choose Obama or McCain's speech as the text that you're going to draw from. How are you going to construct your actual rhetorical analysis? A part of it is going to be using direct quotes from those speeches. Now we'll do, if we have time, I've got a sample rhetorical analysis that I'd like us to get to by the end of the day, so you can see, well, how many direct quotes does this person use, and is that effective? Would I use more? Would I use less? But direct quotes are something that have to be cited. Other things you can use, which they point out, paraphrases and summaries. And then I've repeated here, cite sources, cite sources, cite sources. I can't emphasize that enough. So let's say you've got a direct quote, you're directly quoting this phrase right here. How do they interact with the text? This is in my document. Then at the end of it you would say, you know, Cochran, whatever page number this came from, we could say it was a class lecture. Period. So this is how you cite it. You know, you have the author's last name. If it comes from something like a lecture where there's no page number, you would cite that. And if it's got a page number, if you find this online, then you would want to list the page number. If it's a speech, then you'd want to list that. The point is you want to give credit to where the source came from and point the reader to where that source is. A general rule of thumb in academic writing, you really cannot oversight material. It's really hard to do that. What typically happens is folks undercite it. Think about it like this. Basically, you're giving credit to somebody else. It's kind of hard to overthink somebody. You know, I guess you could, but what typically happens is people underappreciate the folks around them. So the point is, cite, 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 cite. If you've got, you know, 4 or 5 of these type things here, parenthetical citations in a paragraph, that's perfectly fine. Just be sure to cite correctly. The key is to give credit to your sources. We'll talk a little bit more. Maybe I should do an exercise next week on documentation and citing. What do they say about methodology? The next key word here. Ward and Vanderlei talk about methodology. Anybody?
Various research methods that you use to present your evidence.
Okay, various research methods, that's good. What do they say about these various research methods? Okay, they vary according to your audience. In your field, more specifically, that's key. Is methodology varies. You said it exactly right there at the end. It varies depending on your field. So a scientist's methodology for answering a research question is very different than a poet's methodology for answering a research question. The methodology that's used in the biological sciences is different than what's used in chemistry. It's different than what's used in the social sciences. It's different than what's used in the humanities. So methodology, know the methodology in your given field. They have these sub-questions under question number 6 on page 21, which I think are worth taking a look at. The first sub-question is, what is my central research question? This should be something that you should know going into this rhetorical analysis that you're doing for Project 1. So underline that or highlight it or whatever. You need to have a research question. Maybe your research question is, how does Barack Obama's use of emotion in his speech connect with his audience? I just pulled that one out of the sleeve here. How does Barack Obama's use of emotion affect his audience? That's the research question. The answer to that question is going to form a thesis. So if you want to get to writing a thesis, you guys have probably covered some of this in high school, I would imagine, writing thesis statements. But one way to write a thesis statement is to start with a research question. Ask a question about whatever the subject is that you're studying. And think about a question that you actually want the answer to. You don't just make one up just for the heck of it. Think about something that actually interests you personally. Other examples from that Project 1 sheet, I said, you could look at the logic that's used in these speeches. So you might talk about, the research question might be, how does structure in John McCain's speech, how does the structure of John McCain's speech form a logical argument? How does the structure in John McCain's speech form a logical argument? Well, that's my research question. It's not a great one, but I just made it up. So how does the structure of his speech form a logical argument? If I answer that, I might say, well, the structure that he starts with is he looks at economics first. He looks at foreign affairs second. He looks at education third. And that forms the structure of his speech. Does it move seamlessly? Is it coherent? Does it follow an order? Maybe it doesn't. Sometimes people give speeches all the time that aren't as organized as they should be. But part of effective speaking and part of effective writing is being able to do so. Then a couple of other things here, organization and style. So we've just kind of touched on that after methodology. Looking at the organization that somebody uses is his next key word. And then finally, style. Can't underemphasize, or I shouldn't underemphasize style. The style a person has totally affects how we as audience members respond to them. If somebody's too robotic or too uptight or whatever their style is, it affects how we perceive them. And style takes a lot of years to craft in public speaking anyways, to do it well. Some folks have it naturally, I guess. But style is critical, and how you develop style in your writing and in your speaking affects the success of your writing and speaking.
I have a question concerning that.
Yes.
How does one, they talk about this, you can create your own style or you could, follow a tried and true method. So how does one follow a tried and true method but not sound like, but not become robotic about it? Is that
That's a great question.
Figure out?
That's an outstanding question. I don't know that there's an easy answer to that.
That's what I was reading. I was like, well, in some cases it's a good thing, but in other cases it's not. So how are are you supposed to decide, especially like as a freshman?
Well, sure. If you think about it, we already have this knowledge base. Everybody in here has a particular style. If I look around and see how everybody's dressed, we're dressed in a particular style. I would call it sort of middle class American dress style. So you've got a sense of style, at least in terms of your clothing. And so you naturally think about these things. Then in addition to that, perhaps you can find a way to have a little bit of edge, if you will, a little bit of flair or something that's interesting. We've all seen public speakers who are a bit too robotic. They follow the convention straight to the T, and they stand up there and they deliver the speech, and they're about as interesting as a wet towel to watch. They might be perfectly competent politicians and know the law upside down, inside out, but without that extra little X factor, if you will, how charismatic are they? You know, how much style do they have? I don't know if anybody watched the speeches last night, but there was a fella who, I think he's the governor of Montana. Anybody see that last night? The governor of Montana did this speech, and he had a particular style. My wife and I sat there and watched it. We kind of laughed at first, but he had one of those rhinestone collars, and he was really energetic and had all this charisma, and he was getting the crowd fired up, and it was kind of funny. He was kind of playing the part of the clown, but in addition to that, he was very competent too. You got the point that he knew what he was doing, and he wasn't reckless, although he was borderline. It seemed like. But you could tell that at least my perception of it was that he knew what he was talking about too. So there's a fella who had a particular style that was uniquely his. It certainly fits within his home state of Montana. So you've got to think about, well, who's your audience? And what are their assumptions? What are their values? And then can my style fit with those? How can I shape it to fit with those? It may be something as simple as clothing. It might be more about the language that you use. When talking about writing, that's what we're talking about. What kind of language do these speakers use? Do they use colloquial language? Do they use very formal language? Are they passionate? That's a type of style. Do you get caught up in the emotions of what they're doing? That's a particular type of style. Or are they more reasonable and balanced? Yes?
Some people, when they write, they're really, really long-winded and take a long time to make a point.
Yes. Which is a particular type of style. For some folks that might work. Maybe some folks want a little bit more detail. A lot of folks want to get right to the point though and know what the point is and what the purpose is. So style is critical. All of these things combined though form the rhetorical strategies that make for good speakers and good writers. And any of these elements are the basis for doing the rhetorical analysis for Project 1. Okay, we got about 10 minutes to 7 here, so I want to try to show you guys this sample rhetorical analysis activity. If you would, go ahead and open up your email, your Unity email. I just sent a document a little while ago. So I thought it would be helpful if we did this. If we have what you've got there is you've got a letter. This is a letter from George Bush, not the current president, but the former president, 1992, was it 88 to 92? And this is a letter that he wrote to Saddam Hussein on the eve of the Gulf War. So he wrote him a letter before going to war with Saddam Hussein. And then what we're going to do is there's a rhetorical analysis of this letter to come. So we've got the letter here, and then there'll be a rhetorical analysis of the letter. which will be a sample rhetorical analysis that you could draw on in writing your own Project 1 rhetorical analysis. The following is a text of a letter that U.S. President George Bush sent to Iraqi President Saddam Hussein on January 9th, shortly before the start of the 1991 Gulf War. As you read the letter, consider who Bush's audience for the letter is. So think about who is his audience. It's addressed, to President Saddam Hussein. But is that the only audience for this? Who is his audience? What is the purpose of the letter? And does Bush seem to think that Saddam will leave Kuwait? How do you know? And how would you write such a letter if you had to? It's a pretty short letter, as you can see, so let's read through this aloud in class. Somebody want to get us started here by reading the first 2 paragraphs. Go ahead.
We stand today at the brink of war between Iraq and the world. This is a war that began with your invasion of Kuwait. This is a war that can be ended only by Iraq's full and unconditional compliance with the UN Security Council Resolution 678. I am writing to you now directly because what is at stake demands that no opportunity be lost to avoid what would be a certain calamity for the people of Iraq. I am writing as well because it is said by some that you do not understand just how isolated Iraq is and what Iraq faces as a result.
Great, thank you. I am not in a position to judge whether this impression is correct. What I can do, though, is try in this letter to reinforce what Secretary of State James A. Baker told your foreign minister and eliminate any uncertainty or ambiguity that might exist in your mind about where we stand and what we are prepared to do. The international community is united in its call for Iraq to leave all of Kuwait without condition and without further delay. This is not simply the policy of the United States. It is the position of the world community, as expressed in no less than 12 Security Council resolutions. Somebody else want to take the next 2 paragraphs? Go ahead.
We prefer a peaceful outcome. However, anything less than full compliance with UN Security Council Resolution 678 and its predecessors is unacceptable. There can be no reward for aggression, nor will there be any negotiation. Principles cannot be compromised. However, by its full compliance, Iraq will gain the opportunity to rejoin the international community. More immediately, the Iraqi military establishment will escape destruction. But unless you withdraw from Kuwait completely and without condition, you will lose more than Kuwait. What is at issue here is not the future of Kuwait. It will be free, its government restored, but rather the future of Iraq. The choice is yours to make.
Great, thank you. The United States will not be separated from its coalition partners. 12 Security Council resolutions, 28 countries providing military units to enforce them, more than 100 governments complying with sanctions, all highlight the fact that it is not Iraq against the United States, but Iraq against the world. That most Arab and Muslim countries are arrayed against you as well should reinforce what I am saying. Iraq cannot and will not be able to hold on to Kuwait or exact a price for leaving. You may be tempted to find solace in the diversity of opinion that is American democracy. You should resist any such temptation. Diversity ought not be confused with division, nor should you underestimate, as others have before you, America's will. Somebody else want to read the next paragraph? Matt?
Iraq is already feeling the effects of the sanctions mandated by the United Nations. The war coming will be a far greater tragedy for you and your country. Let me state, too, that the United States will not tolerate the use of chemical or biological weapons or the destruction of Kuwait oil fields and installations. Further, you will be held directly responsible for terrorist actions against any member of the coalition. The American people will demand the strongest possible response. You and your country will pay a terrible price if you order unconstitutional actions.
Great. Somebody want to read the next paragraph there? Go ahead.
I write so that not to threaten but to inform. I do so with no sense of satisfaction, for the people of the United States have no quarrel with the people of Iraq. Mr. President, UN Security Council Resolution 678 establishes the period before January 15th of this year as a pause of goodwill. that this crisis may end without further violence. Whether this pause is used as intended or merely becomes prelude to further violence is in your hands and yours alone.
Great. I hope you weigh your choice carefully and choose wisely, for much will depend upon it. So, who is his audience? His primary audience is Saddam Hussein, absolutely. You'll hear me make these distinctions between a primary and a secondary audience. He's writing a letter primarily to Saddam Hussein. Who else is his audience? Cersei.
It's also kind of referencing to the Iraqi people in general.
Mm-hmm.
Just kind of saying, hey, I know that's your leader, but you're going to be affected also, so it's talking to them.
Sure. The Iraqi people, excellent. Who else?
It's the whole world, basically.
Right. The world as well. So, you know, he's writing to a global community. How do you mean? How is he writing to the world?
I guess just letting everybody know what's going to happen.
Mm-hmm. So he's communicating effectively with the world that, hey, I've given this guy a warning. This is what we're going to do. We're aligned together. And this is what's going to happen if he doesn't comply. So he's writing to the global audience as well. What about, say, posterity, history? How would history judge a letter like this? We're already, 15 years or so after this. So how would history perceive a letter like this, do you think?
It's just kind of like the road leading up to what actually happened and what's most famous.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like the predecessor to it.
It's kind of a track record, if you will. It's a snapshot of, it's the road leading up to what happened. It's a record of the communication between the President of the United States and the President of Iraq. What is the purpose of this letter? And let me phrase it. Go ahead, Yasmin.
He said, all right, this letter not to threaten, but to inform.
So he's saying that this is to inform him. Does it sound like a threat?
Yeah.
What else is his purpose, do you think? So he's informing him in very clear and no uncertain terms what's going to happen. Whether that's a threat or not is, for the pundits to decide. But it's pretty clear. That's at least part of his purpose. What else is his purpose?
Well, because he's addressing the entire world, so maybe his purpose was to kind of make him seem less of a bad guy by writing this letter, trying to give Saddam Hussein another chance of
Totally.
warning and to just...
Absolutely. I think you're absolutely right. He's presenting the case to the world saying, look, you've invaded this other country. This is what we're going to do. We're giving you a fair warning to move back to your country. And so it's kind of a record for the world to assess that he's not acting impetuously and that he's given fair warning to what will happen. And perhaps to a further degree to posterity as well. He's saying, there is this written document. We have tried time and time and time again. But that's another purpose, is perhaps he was thinking about, well, how is history going to perceive a letter like this? Very good. Okay, now what we've got about 15 minutes left here, and I've got a rhetorical analysis. What we've just been doing, though, is rhetorically analyzing this document. That is essentially what a rhetorical analysis is. We've been doing it verbally, of course. Now we're going to look at a written rhetorical analysis. So if you would, open up your email, and I'll send everybody a copy of this very quickly, hopefully. Okay, I'm attaching the document now. It's attached and clicking send. So go ahead and open that as it arrives in your email inbox. We've got, like I say, about 15 minutes left here. What I'd like you to do in this next 15 minutes is, anybody not have it open yet? So everybody's got it open except, hasn't come through yet?
You have to say check mail, otherwise it.
Yeah, click check mail and that should hopefully show up soon. Okay, so you've got an actual sample of a rhetorical analysis now in your email inbox. I would encourage you to keep a hold of that. I wouldn't delete this email. You might delete the other one, but this is one that you could refer to in the future as you're writing your rhetorical analysis. What I'd like you to do is read it on your own. On your own, read the sample rhetorical analysis of George Bush's letter. So what you've got there is an actual analysis of the letter. After you've read it, write down answers to the following 4 questions. This can be in your notebook, or if you want to do it in a separate Word document to keep for your records. What is the purpose of the rhetorical analysis itself? What is the topic of the rhetorical analysis? Some of this stuff is kind of, again, sort of softball. But what is the point of the rhetorical analysis? That's a little bit harder question to answer. And then how does the author establish an effective relationship with her audience? So go ahead and read this rhetorical analysis and then try to answer these 4 questions. All right, if you would, let's kind of focus attention here. I don't have quite enough time to do exactly what I wanted to do, but I think the main drive of this is to have you see how a sample rhetorical analysis is done. You all have a copy of that now. That should help in developing your own rhetorical analysis towards Project 1. Other things that I kind of wanted to cover, and we can just think about it, we can answer these sort of rhetorically, if you will, is, what is the purpose of this rhetorical analysis? Any of these questions listed here from 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then A, B, C, and D are areas that you could use in analyzing any document. In this case, we're actually doing a rhetorical analysis of a rhetorical analysis. But the point is, you could use these tools in analyzing any document. For example, your Project 1, you need to be analyzing one of these speeches. So any of these, or some combination of them, could be used to do Project 1. So what is the purpose? What is the topic? What is the point? What did somebody write for what is the point for this rhetorical analysis? Somebody. Tyler.
I think it's the question is just really, or he wants the readers to know that Bush is really just trying to cover all the bases.
Yes. Great.
He's trying to justify the violence that is probably going to happen.
He's justifying the violence. And so this particular rhetorical analysis is just showing that Bush was covering all of his bases so that he wouldn't be held accountable. Interesting. Somebody else? Colin?
I think it was just kind of to present some different ideas on what the document could possibly mean, because obviously you can't say that that's what he meant to say because he didn't explicitly say it, but it's just kind of doing, it's kind of like, I guess, food for thought.
Great.
Yeah.
And one of the neat things about what you said there that I picked up on is it's really hard to pin down somebody on what their actual intent is. This is totally within the domain of the humanities. I mean, that's what the humanities really is all about. That's what folks who study English and language and poetry and classic literature, they debate these things because meaning is often very difficult to pin down in language. So I think it's absolutely true. These tools are ways of analyzing that to arriving hopefully at some sort of consensus about what his intention was and what his purpose was in writing the letter to Saddam Hussein. Other points that you might consider is how does the author establish an effective relationship with her audience? How does she do that in this? And then any one of these questions here too could be applied. How does she use evidence to clarify and support her point? She uses a lot of direct quotes, paraphrases, summaries. These are the same tools that you can use in doing your rhetorical analysis. Just a couple more minutes here. What are her research methods and how does she use them? Anybody have an idea what her research methods are? Go ahead, Cersei.
Part of it was actually referring right back to the text.
Right, it's textual reference. She's doing kind of a case study looking at the text itself. It's great. How does she organize her writing? What are her paragraph structures like? How many sentences are in a paragraph? These are all good questions to be asking in a rhetorical analysis. Again, we're doing a rhetorical analysis here of a rhetorical analysis, but you could use these same questions in analyzing Obama's speech or McCain's speech. And then finally, what stylistic choices does she make and how do they help achieve her goal? And these relate directly to the stuff from chapters 1 and 2 from Ward and Vanderlei. As most of you know, we do have Monday off for the holiday, so we won't be meeting on Monday. That means the next time I'll see you will be next Wednesday in this room here. We do have a reading for next Wednesday. Be sure to do that, and there's a reading response that you need to type up and turn in. Everybody hear me on that. There's a reading response that you need to type up and turn in. It'll be a participation grade just like the summary that I gave back to you today. Have a great weekend. If you have any questions, I'll be around for a few minutes.